Hello, juniors and seniors taking the literature AP. This is the last of 5 videos that I've put together for you. Again, I hope that you watch all of these videos before the AP review session on April 19th from 10 a.m. till noon. That's a community day on Wednesday. And let's just get right to it, right? And wrap things up. Okay, so I'm going back to OneNote. And in the content library, you'll find these resources, the Lit AP resources. We've covered the overview to the test, the multiple choice section, and then we went methodically through the three essay sections, the poetry analysis review, the prose analysis review, the literary argument review, right, to give you a sense for what those things look like. The last couple of things I want to talk about briefly, the essay grading scale and essential tips for the AP essays. So the scale has changed over the last few years. They used to use a 9-point scale. They've simplified that to a 6-point scale. And I want to just review that with you very quickly. You don't need to worry too much about this, but it's good for you to know how are you being assessed when you do these 3 essays, right? So here's what the College Board has released regarding this 6-point scale. Let's open that up, right? For the poetry analysis, you get, it's broken it down on this first page with poetry analysis, the first essay. Notice that you either get, of the 6 points, you get 0 or 1 point for basically the thesis, right? You either have a thesis or you don't have a thesis. So it's very quick. You can get 1 thesis, 1 point just for the thesis here, right? And the point would be response to the prompt with a thesis that presents a defensible interpretation of the poem. Defensible interpretation means it may or may not be sophisticated, but it's defensible, okay? So you get a point for that if you have it. I think all of you will get that point, right? The bulk of your points, and you can look at the details here later if you wish, right? The bulk of your point for the poetry section comes from evidence and commentary. Commentary is another word for analysis. Analysis means pinpointing how specific language usages of DDIST suggest the claim you've established. And you can get up to 4 points, right? And notice that 0 would mean that you did not do really anything. 1 means that you have evidence that is mostly general, and the commentary is mostly summary, as it says. And you can read this later. Notice that if you get 4 points, it says provides specific evidence to support all claims in a line of reasoning in those 2 or 3 body paragraphs. Consistently explains how the evidence, notice the word how the evidence supports a line of reasoning. You're pinpointing how the language is supporting the claim that you've established, and explains how multiple literary elements or techniques in the poem contribute to the meaning. The techniques, did you look at figurative language? Did you look at point of view? Did you look at syntax or diction, right? Whatever it was. So you can get up to 4 points in terms of your evidence and analysis or evidence and commentary. And then the final point would be the sophistication piece, which is basically analogous to boldness of thinking. Remember that, right? Is your thesis really worthy and strong and interesting? So it's not just that you have a thesis, it's, as it says here, the overall sophistication of your thought throughout demonstrates sophistication of thought and or develops complex literary argument, right? So again, 1 point for a thesis, a viable thesis, up to 4 points for what you do in your body paragraphs, your evidence and analysis, evidence and commentary, and then 1 point for sophistication, right? Whether there is sophistication of thought here, right? Okay, so it's possible you could have a viable thesis that's not that sophisticated and not get a point here, but most likely, right, with a viable thesis, you'll probably do okay with this last part, sophistication. If we look at the prose fiction analysis, it's the same kind of thing, right? A point for a viable thesis, up to 4 points for good evidence and commentary, right? And again, I'm not going to read through all the details, but I do encourage you to look through these, right? And then finally, a point for the sophistication category, right? Whether there's sophistication there or not. And then finally, the literary argument, the open prompt, where you write about a book of your choosing, given a theme-based prompt, same thing. A thesis, is it viable? There's a point, right? Evidence and commentary, right? And let's look at 4 points here. Provide specific evidence to support all claims in a line of reasoning, and consistently explains how the evidence supports a line of reasoning. So again, with the open prompt, with the literary argument, unlike the other two essays, you're not going to be quoting from anything, right? You're just going to be showcasing your knowledge of the book that you're writing about by being able to refer to specific examples about characters or the setting of the novel or whatever it is the prompt is asking you to write about, right? So they want to see that you can be specific and concrete as you make your case, right? And then again, last here is this sophistication, right? Is there sophistication of thought? You can get up to a point for that. So that's the way they're assessing now with this 6-point scale, right? Essays of 5 or 6 are typically the stronger ones, right? And I'm confident that most of us can get up there, right? In terms of as long as you prepare for this literary argument. Okay, the last thing I'm covering here is some tips that you want to keep in mind as you go through this. And I'm going to explain some of these, right? First of all, look at number 1, penmanship. You will be writing by longhand, right? So do try to write as clearly as possible. I would struggle a little bit here because my longhand writing is pick and scrawl, but just try to be as legible as possible, right? They need to be able to read what you've written, right? Notice number 2, you can write on the test booklet. So circle keywords in the prompt, right? And remember that when they say how means technique, not plot. And I covered that in previous videos. How means devices, techniques, elements, right? And remember that when you're writing an essay, the point is not just to laundry list techniques. Like here, the writer's using this kind of syntax, and here's a metaphor, and here's personification. To what end are those techniques used, right? So you need to reveal how those techniques or devices reveal meaning, right? So the big thing is that the device or the technique is not the focus of your essay. The meaning of the work of the passages or whatever claim you're making, that is what's at stake here, right? 4, you've heard this before. Define the terms you use, such as tone, point of view, diction, syntax, rather than saying the speaker uses syntax, imagery, and point of view. That's not saying anything, really. Define the terms. Choppy syntax, images of warfare, a retrospective point of view, or a first-person point of view, right? Or a third-person point of view, whatever it might be, right? 5, arguable thesis statement, right? Make sure your thesis is an exact reflection of what the prompt is asking you to do without just restating the prompt, right? And we looked at that earlier in those 3 videos where we walked you through the highlighting of the green and the yellow parts, right? That's what you want to do, right? It's important, number 6, to plan. You want to spend 10 minutes up to 15. And remember, you are your own timer. No one's going to be giving you time checks, right? Use 10 or 15 of the allotted 40 minutes to plan each essay. Don't begin writing until you have a plan, right? So the poetry or prose prompts, read through the passages a couple of times, keeping the prompt in mind, circling things, hammer out a quick plan, and then you go, right? Introductions, number 7, how long should they be? They don't need to be long, right? If you were writing an essay over the scope of a week, you might have a lengthier intro, and you might use an explication method or bring in a contemporary example. These will be brief, and that's okay, right? Your intro can be focused. I would say 3 to 5 sentences, get to your thesis, and then, in your body paragraphs, you're proving your thesis, right? 8, don't use long quotations from the given passages in the poetry and prose, right? Instead, pull out individual words or short phrases from the passage. You have heard this from your English teachers. Don't quote at length. Weave in small bits of text as you make your analysis, right? 9, each of your body paragraphs should feature evidence, that is, quotes from the poetry and prose prompts, and well-chosen examples for the open prompt. The open prompt is also called the literary argument, right? And remember the 3-part process in integrating quotations gracefully into your analysis of literary devices with an interpretation of meaning. Be sure to explain the relevance of the quote to the prompt and your analysis, right? And that's the same thing you've done in English classes. When you are using evidence, you're explaining how that evidence is proving the claim that you're making. The evidence doesn't speak for itself. You pinpoint how the evidence underscores your claim, right? Number 10, a concluding paragraph. Should you have one? Yes. Does it need to be long? No, not necessarily. By the time you get to your conclusion, you probably won't have too much time left, and that's okay. Your concluding paragraph, even if it's just 2 or 3 sentences long, and it's just kind of repeating points you've made, that's better than no conclusion. Just give it some kind of closure. They're going to be assessing you primarily on the quality of your thesis and your argumentation and analysis in your body paragraphs, and your overall ability to write coherently and eloquently and so on, sentence variety and vocabulary appropriate to the task, those kinds of things. But you do want a conclusion, even if it's very brief, and that's fine. Number 11, remember that when you're dealing with poems, poems have speakers and stanzas. They don't have narrators and paragraphs. So don't refer to the narrator of a poem. It's the speaker of a poem, right? Or you can just use the poet's name if you want to. Don't talk about paragraph 2 in the poem. It's stanza 2, right? 12 and 13 are important. And you've heard this from your English teachers. Don't moralize about the quality of the work, whether you liked it or not, or what you felt about it. This isn't a book club. The focus is on literary analysis, right? You didn't need to spend time talking about the author. He was a great author. He does such a great job, etc. Those are meaningless, right? So remember that you're focused on making an argument, right? And number 13, I think, goes to that point. Avoid what's called the affective fallacy, which argues that the reader's response to a poem or the reader's response to a prose piece is the ultimate indication of its value, right? So you might have heard this. Don't forge an argument, a thesis around how something makes you feel. That's fuzzy, that's subjective, that leads you away from making an argument that's compelling or viable. And so I would avoid the word feel altogether, right? This passage really makes the reader feel, or there's a story-like feel, right? As you read, it makes the reader flow through the passage and feel like you're there. Those statements don't mean anything, right? Maybe that's the way you feel, but you can't make an argument on that. That's a subjective experience. Analysis is, the careful consideration of evidence, right, to articulate a viable claim. Avoid claims about the fuzzy reader's feelings and so on. Vague language, right? Try to avoid general terms like positive or negative, good or bad. When he's a positive character, he's a bad character, right? He's cunning, it's a crafty character. He's altruistic, right? The tone is never positive or negative, right? Maybe it's upbeat, effervescent, right? Gloomy, right? Be specific with your language. Don't rely on things like good, bad, positive, negative. Try to use active voice, simple present tense, and strong verbs to the extent that you can. Present tense in particular. And remember, why do we use present tense? Because we're making an argument. We're not summarizing what happened. You're making an argument, right? So in that case, you use the literary present. You want to avoid plot summary, right? Same thing, right? Take risks, number 17. Show off your strengths as a writer, right? Be critical, be analytical, right? And be confident. Number 18, remember for the literary argument, use that major works data sheet. Make sure you know 3 books backwards and forwards. Make sure they're all of literary merit, right? Don't just prepare 1 book. That's taking a gamble. 3 different books really well, you'll probably be okay for the literary argument. In the open prompt, also called the literary argument, remember the required genre, a novel or a play. Do not write about a short story. Do not write about a memoir. Don't write about children's young adult literature, however good it may be, like Harry Potter or something like that. Don't do that, right? Spy novels, genre fiction, that kind of stuff. And remember, the list of books for the open prompt, also called the literary argument, it's suggested, not required when you have those columns, right? It's okay if the book that you write about is not on those columns, because they're going to say, choose a work of literature from the below list or one of comparable literary merit. Okay, that's anything you've read in English class or anything that is of comparable literary merit that you've read on your own. If you have questions about that, talk to me or your English teachers and they can steer you in the right direction. Okay, so that is it. That's the last. Thank you for your patience. You made it through these 5 videos, right? I look forward to seeing a lot of you on April 19th from 10 till noon, and we'll conduct a final session then, right? And remember, the AP exam is on, I believe it's Wednesday, May the 3rd. So there's still time. Begin preparing sooner rather than later, so you don't do it all at once. Do it in stages and pieces, right? Maybe one night you do a multiple choice exam, right? Another night you practice a poetry exam, a poetry prompt. Another night you spend some time with the literary argument, right? The major works data sheet, right? Remember that me and any other of the English teachers in the English department, we are here to help you. So solicit feedback informally from us whenever you need. Thank you for your time.